So, welcome to Rumble on the River 29. I don't know why this is so hard to use. Okay, maybe that's better. My name is Lynn Spitaleri Handlin. I'm with Extinction Rebellion PDX, Cascadia Magical Activists, and the Rumble Planning Team. So, we are here today on stolen lands. These are the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Cowlitz bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. Today, our region's native communities are over 70,000 strong, descended from more than 380 tribes. I'm going to read a little bit from an article by Professor Victoria Sutton, published in the Native News Online. On November 6, 2025, Colorado River tribes passed an ordinance that states that the Colorado River has been and will always be a person under tribal law and will be entitled to the protections under tribal law befitting the status. Personhood of natural objects like rivers and trees has long been recognized in tribal law, stories, and traditions. In Western law, however, the concept of personhood is still developing. It was not until 1879 that Native Americans were given legal status in America as persons. No actual rights, mind you, just that they are persons. Corporations had a much easier time being recognized as persons under U.S. law and have more rights. I want you all to consider that for a second and think about what it would be like if we could get our governments at every level to follow the lead of the Colorado River and other tribes to recognize the rights of nature rather than personhood for corporations. Speaking of recognition, on Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court, our best friends, declined to take up the case brought by the Chinook Indian Nation to be granted federal recognition. So please, action for our original people's acknowledgement. Contact your U.S. delegation and tell them it is past time for the U.S. government to recognize the Chinook Indian Nation. Congressional action can actually solve this.
Thank you.
So, first of all, thanks to the Rumble Planning Team. You know who you are. Stand up. Be seen. And I want you all to... It's a nightmare. Look at your programs created by Mac McKinley. Thanks, Mac. And on the front, there's information about the panelists. And on the back, there's a lot of handy phone numbers that you should use often, elected officials and whatnot. Also in the back, there's tables. Organizations are tabling, so go back there, visit people, talk, learn, sign up, do stuff. So, how many of you are here for your very first Rumble? Yay! Next question, who here brought a new Rumbler tonight? Yay! And for everybody else, try and bring someone next time. So before we have our methane panel, we're going to hear from Cindy Quayle, a board member of PIRC, the Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition. Welcome, Cindy. Right there. I'm sure you'll do better with your mic.
I don't know. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Quayle, and as she said, I'm on the board of Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about what we do. If you have any questions for me, I'll be at that table. You can come up afterwards and ask me any questions you have. So we are primarily a rapid response organization, and what that means is our goal is to not have anyone leave leave Oregon. And so we try to do deportation defense, and to that end we have a hotline, and that hotline is available 24/7. We have dispatchers who speak Spanish and English, and we also have contracted with the translation services so we can translate to other languages as well. If someone is having a problem with ice, or they see ice in their neighborhood, they can call the hotline, and I have that phone number over there. And we can mobilize people to come out and support the person that's being attacked. I can't say it any other way. And then one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to get people trained in all the neighborhoods in Oregon. And we do that with something called the Migra Watch. And it's very similar to what we saw in Minneapolis, where people were honking horns and protecting their neighbors. You know, right now people are very afraid to come out of their houses. So, you know, if people in the neighborhoods want to get organized and help people buy groceries and those kinds of things. You know, when they take somebody and detain them, it often is the breadwinner. So then you have people left in town who have a very difficult time protecting themselves and their families. We also do something called, we have legal observers, and we go down to the Macadam Ice Building every day of the week in the morning when people have their ice check-ins, and we take down people's information, and if they don't come out within an hour and a half, we assume they've been detained, and we call their emergency contact, and we try and get lawyers for them. We also try, when people come out from their appointments, to go to our office, which is right across from the ice building, and we try and have them sign up for ECO, which stands for Equity Corps of Oregon, or Innovation Law Lab. And these are two organizations that provide free legal services for immigrants. And if people are signed up with those organizations, then if they get detained, we can get a lawyer to them very quickly. So those are just some of the things that we do. We also have, the community has just come forward and been so supportive to us. So one of our volunteers made a fundraiser toolkit. So if anyone's interested in doing a fundraiser for us, we have a toolkit available that we can send to you. If you need to contact us, or you can email us through our website, and also in our website we have all our trainings are listed there, so you can sign up through our website for the trainings. And I'm very excited, and thank you for inviting us to this. It's a very important program, and as you all know, a huge reason of people are migrating now is because of climate change. So everything that we do is related. So our website, you just put in PIRC, P-I-R-C, and it'll come up. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Cindy. These are really scary times. We are living in a failing democracy, barreling on towards a fascist state. Why should we care about methane? It seems silly, but it's not, because methane is a huge driver of climate change, and climate change is state and billionaire-sponsored violence against everyone, everywhere, and must not be ignored. Methane is a global menace that we can fight locally. So listen, learn, ask a lot of questions. We will have cards to pass around, so be prepared. And be prepared to act. So that's it. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have right here Samantha Hernandez, the Healthy Climate Program Director at OPSR. Also really active in making the CEI hub less terrifying. Melanie Plaut is MD and also part of the Risky Business Group, who just got the risk bonding measure passed at the state level. And Danny Noonan is the climate energy and labor strategist with Breach Collective, focusing on building electrification, corporate accountability, greenwashing, and a lot of other important stuff. Woohoo! Diana Meisenhelter is with Extinction Rebellion PDX Action Team, Extinction Rebellion US, and Extinction Rebellion Global. Also, the NAACP Climate Justice Committee working on what used to be called the Build Shift program. She's also an amazing gardener. Carra Sahler is with the Green Energy Institute, focusing on regulatory proceedings at the PUC, decarbonization, and a lot of other really important policy work. So, welcome. Let's start with Samantha. Can I go? Yes, go.
There I am. Amazing. Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Hernandez, and I am with the Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. And today I want to talk to you all about a really insightful report that was published by National Physicians for Social Responsibility, along with some other organizations doing amazing work at the intersection of climate and health. Fossil fuels are very horrendous for our health and our planet and have many costs that are underestimated. And so before I dive in, I just wanted to give a brief overview of who is Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. And so we are an organization of health professionals and public health advocates working with frontline communities and allied organizations, many of which are actually here. And we use science and evidence-based expertise to build movements that drive systemic change, that protect human health and social justice. And we seek a healthy, just, and peaceful world for present and future generations. And so my agenda for today is that I will be going over the health harms of the fossil fuel life cycle, and then really quickly, depending on how much time I have, I will be going over how fossil fuel pollution impacts each system of the body. And so before I dive in, I want to preface with the statement: natural gas is not natural. And you might be wondering, well, Samantha, how is it not natural? It literally says it in the name. And it's a misnomer. Natural gas is a fossil gas similar to coal and oil, and mostly made of methane, which is the topic of tonight's Rumble. Methane, for those who don't know, is a hydrocarbon composed of one carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms, hence CH4. And methane is so concerning, as Lynn was telling us, because over the first 2 decades after its release, methane is more than 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide at warming the climate. And it's responsible for about 25% of global heating today. So, very concerning. And then our next slide. And so the first stage that I want to focus on is extraction. And right here you see a picture of hydraulic fracturing, also commonly known as fracking. And fracking is essentially the process in which oil and gas is extracted from shale rock. A drill rig, which you can see in this picture right here, creates wells that reach thousands of feet below the surface. And fracking fluid, which is a mixture of water, sand, and chemicals, is pumped into the rock at a very high pressure. And this high pressure essentially cracks the rock, allowing the fuel to release. And so fracking for methane gas does a lot of damaging things. It contaminates the water, and studies have shown that living near fracking sites is associated with health problems, including childhood cancer, birth defects, kidney, and respiratory diseases. And so the next stage that I want to talk about is the processing, refining, and petrochemical manufacturing stage. And these processes, they all emit hazardous air pollutants like benzene, formaldehyde, and other carcinogens. And for those who don't know, carcinogens are substances that are capable of causing cancer. And these air pollutants, no surprise, heightens the risk of cancer, respiratory illness, and adverse birth outcomes. And so the next stage that's also harmful to our health is the transportation and distribution of fossil fuels. For one, pipeline leaks. I think you all remember what happened in November of last year. The BP-operated Olympic pipeline, which actually supplies over 90% of Oregon's transportation fuels from Washington, leaked, and Governor Tina Kotek actually declared a fuel emergency. There's also the risk of accidents, derailment, and spills. Many of us are familiar with the Mosier Trail derailment that happened in 2016. 47,000 gallons of oil was released. And so the most concerning one is the combustion of fossil fuels. And so when methane gas is burned for whatever use, electricity, transportation, heating, it emits harmful air pollutants that are strongly linked to cardiovascular issues, respiratory illnesses, and more, and is driving the climate crisis that we are experiencing today. And so another thing that I briefly wanted to talk about was the waste products. For example, oil and gas refining produce chemicals that are used to manufacture products like plastics, pesticides, and fertilizers, which are actually extending the harm into consumer products. And so my next kind of discussion is how fossil fuel pollution impacts each system of the body. And I want to start with the respiratory health. And I want to invite everyone to take a deep breath with me. So in for 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, and out for 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3. Thank you all so much for sharing that breath with me. I actually learned the other day that lungs are considered to be one of the most resilient organs due to their remarkable ability to repair. And so in the extraction, processing, and burning of fossil fuels, these processes release air pollutants that can penetrate deeply into the lungs that cause inflammation, cell and tissue damage, along with other types of respiratory damages. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about was our cardiovascular system. And so I want to invite everyone, this is kind of like a head, toes, and knees kind of situation, to put your hand on your heart and take a couple seconds to feel it beating. The heart works so hard to pump blood and deliver oxygen to our body. And so one of the harmful air pollutants emitted by the fossil fuel life cycle is particulate matter. And particulate matter, for those who don't know, is a mixture of solid particles and liquid droplets found in the air. So think of smoke and soup, for example. And so studies have shown that short-term exposure, so like hours to days, of particulate matter size 2.5 increases the risk for heart attacks, strokes, and deaths from cardiovascular disease. Another thing I want to talk about is the brain. So I want to invite everyone to put their hands on their heads and just feel that brain in there. There's a lot going on in there, isn't there, right? Air pollution from burning fossil fuels can harm the brain. Research shows that exposure to air pollutants can cause inflammation, stress, and changes in brain chemistry. And these can damage brain cells, which interfere with how the brain communicates and increases the risk of neurological diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, unfortunately. Also want to briefly talk about our mental health. So exposure to pollutants can cause inflammation, stress, and neurotoxicity on the brain. Again, these things are all interrelated. which are linked to higher risk of depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges. Not to mention the mental health of trying to survive and endure the climate crisis. And then the last thing I want to end with is 3 minutes left, thank you, is the reproductive health. And so there are so many worrisome health concerns to the reproductive system. Honestly, it can be its own presentation. And I was just thinking before this presentation how crazy it is that fossil fuel pollution can negatively impact our health starting in the womb. You know, we haven't even been born, and it can negatively impact our health. And so exposure to fossil fuel pollution is linked to poor pregnancy, pregnancy loss, adverse birth outcomes like low birth weight, and more. And so that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening and for your time and attention, and I will pass it on to Melanie.
It was great. It was perfect.
Okay, so my name is Melanie Plaut. I'm a volunteer with Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. And I've always been interested in what is it going to look like between where we are now, where we're mostly surviving on fossil fuels, and our ideal future, where everything is clean and green. And how do we get there from here? We know that, in this day of worsening and maybe accelerating climate change and fossil fuel wars, it's more important than ever that we speed this transition. But I've been thinking about this, and why am I having trouble?
So Melanie, can you talk directly into the mic?
Is it, which clue? Oh, there we go. Okay. So what we have to do is we really have to manage two systems at the same time. So we have to increase electricity, right? That's why we're worried about the web and being able to make it affordable and all these other things. But at the same time, we have to downregulate the fossil fuel system. So originally, I was mostly going to talk about thermal energy networks, which is a system of changing our natural gas into home system into an electric system, basically. And I'm still going to talk about that, but I also heard a really fascinating interview that David Roberts did with a woman named Emily Gruber. And Emily is a sociologist and a civil engineer. And she talked about what she calls the mid-transition. And I thought this interview was so fascinating. So basically, I'm going to do a book report about that interview. So I'm sorry, none of these are really original ideas. And there's a lot more questions than answers. So this is what one of those transitions, at least in our mind, sort of looks like. So this is internal combustion engines. That's the ice, not the other ice. That's the ice on this chart. Whoops, let me go back. Oh dear. How do I go back? Are you going to come and help me go back, Deneen? Thank you. Oh, on the keyboard. No? Okay, all right. I can use those. Okay, great. Sorry for all the technical difficulties today. So you can see that, what we assume will happen is that the number of ICE cars on the road will go down and the number of electric vehicles will go up. But what's going to happen in that kind of middle time when we maybe are 50-50 instead of 90-10 like we are now? So there's a lot of problems that can happen along the way, and I think I've thought a fair bit about the first three of these. So first of all, the transition isn't fast enough. That's the one we're always talking about, right? That it's inequitable because it's expensive to make some of these changes and people are going to be left behind. And then the third one is another one we talk about, the sort of the death spiral. So if all of us individually, like I have electrified my home, but a lot of people on my block are still using natural gas to heat and to cook. And as more and more people who are able to electrify do so, there are going to be fewer and fewer and less economically able people left behind to support that fossil fuel system. And then there's a couple of other things that I really hadn't thought about as much. And we know that the growing industries and the shrinking industries, and they don't always get along so well. You think about Northwest Natural Gas, and because they're in an existential fight for their lives, they want to do everything possible, really, to stop electrification. And they are huge foes to most of the things that we are fighting for. And then there's this thing called the minimum viable scale. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But basically it means when something gets small enough, it may not function as well as when it was bigger. So here's just an example. Right now there's a gas station on every corner, right? And electric charging stations are hard to find. But there's a lot of thought being put into trying to increase electric charging stations. I was listening to a PGE webinar the other day, and they are doing things like increasing the electricity to places where they think maybe they might get a request for a charging station even before they get that request, okay, so that they can do things a little more quickly. But what about when we're sort of halfway through that transition, or maybe 3/4 through the way through that transition? There's still going to be a lot of cars that need gas on the road. And what's going to happen? How far are people going to have to drive to find a gas station? And how mad are they going to be that they can't find a gas station? And that might sort of stop the smooth transition that we need to be going through. We also know that unmanaged transitions can cause a lot of pain. So you think about the steel industry, the transition that happened, and the Rust Belt, and the job loss, and the political blowback related to that. So we know a lot of bad things can happen in transitions that aren't well handled. Okay, so let me get back to the original topic of my talk, which was thermal energy networks. So if you didn't know, Northwest Natural's plan to try to decarbonize, which they're required to do by state law, is that they want to substitute the fossil gas that they use now with what they call renewable, and I'm putting that in quotes, renewable natural gas that comes from places like factory farms, is in short supply, is expensive. Or they want to substitute it with hydrogen, which is, anyway, so it's a Rube Goldberg kind of thing. I don't even know what to say. It's bad.
Snake oil.
It's snake oil, yes, it's snake oil, and I think they must know at some level that they can't do it. So there's this alternative plan that has been, it's popularized first, I think, in Massachusetts, but there are other states that are doing it now too. And what you do is you branch prune the gas system. In other words, instead of one person spot electrifying, you electrify a whole block or a whole neighborhood at one time. And not only do you electrify everybody, but you do it with a shared resource, which is a geothermal or a thermal heat pump from ground source air. Now you think about it, how many people here have a heat pump in their home? Yeah, so a fair number of us do, I'm not too surprised. But those are probably, there might be a few exceptions, but probably air source heat pumps, which means that your heat pump, when it's 0 degrees outside, has to somehow get heat out of that cold air, and when it's 100 degrees outside, has to figure out how to get cold out of that hot air, whereas the temperature underground is always 55 degrees. The problem is that it's pretty expensive to put in a ground source heat pump. There are people who do it for individual homes. But if you can do it in a whole neighborhood, you can get somebody to come in and drill these holes down into the street and then put a pipe to everybody's house. And guess what? This technology uses some of the skills that the gas company already has. So it's a possible transition for a natural gas utility. And that's what they're doing in some of these East Coast places. They're changing into what they call thermal utilities. So they're still going to provide heat to your house, but they're going to do it with a different mechanism. One of the good things about this is that it avoids that death spiral, because some of the people are going to be on the, the ground source heat pumps, and some are still going to be on methane, but it's all one company, and in terms of supporting it, it still has a bunch of customers. So there are a lot of things that I like about this model. It also provides a lot of jobs for electricians and plumbers and HVAC. And in some of the states where it's been introduced, it's been highly supported by the trades. So I think that's another good advantage of it. In Massachusetts, they have a little bit of an unusual system. Their gas system is really old. It's so old that some of the pipes are held together with horsehair. Okay, so it was really, really leaky. And they were going to have to replace a lot of it, which is very expensive. So even though putting in these ground source heat pumps is also kind of expensive, when you compare it to having to build new gas pipes, it makes sense. Also, it's really cold in Massachusetts. So I think there is some question about whether this is a cost-effective way of dealing here in Oregon. Okay, minimal viable scale. Okay, so this could be physical, like a pipe doesn't work as well when you have half as much gas or something going into it. Or it could be that when things get smaller, you lose economies of scale. And again, I'm taking all these ideas from Emily Gruber. Now I'm back to my book report part of the talk. Also, loss of expertise. So you might have heard, well, we're going to get all of our electricity from solar and wind and batteries, but every once in a while there might be a problem, and we might have to occasionally rely on a natural gas plant. Well, who's going to have the expertise to run that plant if it's only being used 2 or 3% of the time? And why would anyone go into that business or to be trained for it? And then what about the safety issues? When we're using less and less of this fossil fuel, when we know that fossil fuels, is explosive and all those kinds of things. So fossil fuel in and of itself is kind of a market failure because we haven't paid for the, pollution and the global warming. But there are other potential problems with trying to let the market do this. So if we have to shrink the number of businesses, who's going to decide who stays open and who closes? Refineries apparently don't operate very efficiently if they get down less than about 60 or 70% of capacity. And they have to create a bunch of different products, and we may want to keep using jet fuel longer than we use gasoline. And so there's a problem for, will they be able to maintain any kind of ratio, which is how they operate most efficiently now. And then, if the transition is poorly managed, there likely will be political backlash, and we'll stall out. We won't get to that clean future that we want to get to. So these are some things that Emily suggests we think about. More regulation, or maybe even nationalization of energy industry. Taking over the industries before they go bankrupt so we don't end up with a bunch of Superfund sites. Training specifically for closure and safety as these decrease. And she feels pretty strongly that we're going to need better social safety nets because there is going to be job loss associated with this transition. So I just think this was all good food for thought. The transition's not going to be easy. We should start thinking about it now. The other point she makes is go straight to clean when you can, so you avoid 2 transitions. For instance, in China, they're mostly going from coal straight to clean instead of using a lot of natural gas in the middle. Anyway, it made me think about renewable diesel. So that's all I got.
You're going to stay here.
I think so. Can everyone hear me okay? How's the volume? Good? Okay, awesome. Well, good evening. I'm Danny, as Lynn mentioned. I'm going to be covering similar ground to Melanie. Should actually queue up my slides, see if this works.
Right, left,
The mouse is not working.
It's too far away from his phone.
might be.
Okay, well,
Do you want me to stand up there and you can say?
No, I'll just move.
Okay.
I was just trying to be lazy and surrounded by my. I think you grabbed the wrong mouse.
Oh,
Okay.
that
They were bamboozling you with the decoy mouse. A fossil fuel industry plant clearly put a. Anyway, yep, that's me. And my presentation is going to be on why gas utilities won't decarbonise, at least left to their own devices. So I am going to be covering similar ground to Melanie. I will be offering a bit of a different perspective on why investor-owned gas utilities like Northwest Natural aren't moving away from fossil fuels. And I'm going to be focusing on these utilities' corporate personhood, let's say, and how this drives their behaviour. In the spirit of what Samantha did, I'm going to invite some audience participation. Can anyone raise their hand and tell me what the paramount duty is of the directors of an investor-owned utility like Northwest Natural? What's their, excuse me, overriding duty? Yes. That's right, shareholder value. Private corporations like Northwest Natural are legally required to increase shareholder value. If the directors don't do that, they're breaching their fiduciary duties. And so that's going to be an underlying theme as we look at how Northwest Natural's approach to climate policy has shifted over the years. So let's start with Northwest Natural's messaging prior to 2017. Hopefully their YouTube page just has a long list of videos of ads of theirs. This was very much the heyday of the fracking boom. Domestic gas prices were very cheap because of this, and many big green orgs were still focusing on shifting from coal to gas rather than making a cleaner shift to renewables. So at this time, Northwest Natural's messaging was centered around the efficiency and affordability of gas heating, while environmental concerns were claimed to be addressable through turning your thermostat down. But there was a big shift around 2017. If I can get the mouse to work. With climate politics becoming more mainstream and there being a growing recognition that gas emissions would need to be addressed through electrification rather than turning your thermostat down, and legislators in Oregon were starting to push for cap and trade and looking at sort of economy-wide tools to reduce emissions. And it was at this time that Northwest Natural began to apprehend an existential threat to their business model. And this threat resulted in a pretty dramatic shift in strategy. The idea now was that gas use could increase while emissions somehow decreased, and that this would occur through conserving, offsetting, and innovating, or to quote then Northwest Natural CEO David Anderson, a future where wires above the ground are delivering renewable electrons and pipes below the ground are delivering renewable molecules, namely renewable natural gas, hydrogen, and something called synthetic methane. There were several problems with this vision. The first was availability. Each of these resources are relatively scarce, and a regional utility like Northwest Natural was essentially proposing to monopolize the US's supply of these resources. The second was cost. The unit cost of each of these resources would be several times more expensive than fossil gas, probably for many years, if not decades to come, and this would lead to dramatic rate increases for customers. The third was efficacy. Many of these resources only marginally reduce emissions rather than eliminating them completely, and in some instances may actually increase emissions relative to conventional fossil gas. The fourth issue was that none of these resources improve the health issues with gas combustion that Samantha discussed. And the last issue is that a growing market in some of these resources in the utility sector, speaking specifically about biogas or renewable natural gas here, might actually incentivize increased pollution in other sectors, and there's actually currently a lawsuit of Northwest Natural customers at the moment that alleges this. So, fast forward to the 2020s and these problems have well and truly materialized. Northwest Natural has failed to procure anywhere near the volume of renewables they said they would, even with one of the country's most favorable regulatory regimes to do so. What they have invested in is some of the most environmentally destructive sources of biogas in the country, with a particular focus on industrial slaughterhouses in the Midwest. their hydrogen investments, which they have widely promoted to lawmakers at the local and state level, are likely increasing the emissions intensity of the gas supply, and I'm happy to elaborate on that in the Q&A, but it's quite a technical explanation for why that is. And in recent months, evidence has emerged that these RNG and hydrogen investments are failing financially. But Northwest Natural has utterly failed on its, to deliver on its vision of a decarbonised gas system should not surprise us if we understand this vision to be just one limb of a wider corporate strategy aimed at undermining regulation and keeping the gas flowing, keeping shareholder value, maintained or if not increasing. These corporate tactics are well understood because they have been replicated over and over again at different times and in different industries. With Northwest Natural's core profit motive in mind, it's far more likely that the purpose of their renewables investments was never to fully execute a transition to renewables, but was instead to create doubt in the mind of government decision makers that a heavy-handed regulatory approach to electrify buildings was necessary. That is to say, if you can make electrification and a decarbonised gas system seem like comparable alternative approaches to building decarbonisation, each with their advantages and disadvantages, then you can prolong the financially profitable status quo. Yep, that's the one. And of course there is another limb to this strategy, which is to manufacture opposition to proposed regulations through a network of front groups and trade associations, as well as to use litigation to further delay the implementation of regulations that you fail to prevent from passing. And I'll just note that this kind of strategy is not unique, but is being coordinated and deployed on a national and international level, with different narratives being adapted to different markets. But in recent months, we've actually seen a further shift in strategy from Northwest Natural. What their current CEO has called a new chapter for the company is a focus on diversification of holdings, and particularly the acquisition of water and gas utilities outside the Pacific Northwest. And I specifically want to point out that in late 2024 and mid-2025, Northwest Natural acquired two separate Texas gas utilities, both of which have a business model of essentially serving gas to new developments in areas of urban or suburban sprawl. So that's a picture of the kind of developments they're serving. And between their current and contracted backlog of customers, these two Texas acquisitions would amount to more than 30% of Northwest Natural's customer base in Oregon and Washington. And there is approximately zero chance that Texas's, quote, constructive regulatory and policy environment will require decarbonisation or electrification. So I think Northwest Natural's shifting strategy is on one level an indicator that we are winning in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest in some of these electrification policy debates. No, we're not winning enough or nearly quickly enough. The gas connections are slowing and heat pump adoption is increasing, enough so that shareholders seem to be telling Northwest Natural that it can't continue with a business model where 90% of its revenues come from utility gas sales in Oregon and Washington. So if we want, we can call that a win. But I think on another level, and perhaps paradoxically, Northwest Natural is no longer acting like a future renewables company. Instead, they're doubling down on fossil fuels. And in their integrated resource plan, they're also signalling that they do not expect the regulatory environment to be tightened much further, and that it might actually be rolled back or unwound in the coming years. That likely has something to do with the political climate federally, with the gas utilities leading trade association very explicitly doubling down on fossil fuels and calling for federal preemption of state and local gas regulations. But another reason I think is that Northwest Natural has decided that the winning narrative for them regionally is, instead of focusing on becoming a renewables company, is to argue that the electric grid is not ready for building electrification. And we're increasingly seeing Northwest Natural position both its retail gas system as well as its gas storage facilities as the solution to this claimed insufficient regional grid capacity. And this leads me to my final point, which is that I think we have to face the fact that Portland General Electric and Pacific Power, Portland's investor-owned electric utilities, have not helped the case for building electrification in their service territories. And this is partly because those utilities also have prioritized protecting shareholder value and chasing profits or minimizing losses over making the necessary investments in grid capacity and renewable generation to achieve an effective energy transition for the communities they serve. Both these utilities still have a significant percentage of fossil fuels on their system, and Pacific Power in particular has been openly defying the state's mandated 100% clean energy targets. Compare this with Oregon's publicly owned utilities and municipalities that have managed to pass electrification policy, and we can see that these utilities are already highly decarbonized and have much cheaper rates. In some municipalities where I work, like in Bend currently, the emissions intensity and cost of energy provided by Pacific Power is very clearly undermining the policy case for electrification, whereas the case for electrification is much clearer with the neighbouring Central Electric Cooperative. And we also can't escape the fact that part of the reason utilities like PGE aren't making the level of investment that would help to accelerate the decline of gas in Portland is that these utilities are largely owned by the same shareholders, giant asset management firms that care little about the values of Portlanders or other Oregon communities. I have 1 minute left. Good, this is my very final point, which is that contrary to what was recently argued by our friends at Sightline Institute, I think we do actually need to start thinking about not only the kinds of regulations we impose on utilities, but who owns them. This is an interesting article. It summarizes some of the sort of world-leading, innovative gas transition policies that Melanie talked about, but ultimately argues that public ownership isn't necessary to deliver them. I would strongly disagree. I think it is going to be enormously difficult politically to achieve a public takeover of an investor-owned utility, and there is no technical reason that we couldn't pass world-leading regulations on these utilities in Oregon without making them public. But I think the last 5 years or so of electrification policy here has also taught us that even modest regulations on gas utilities are extremely difficult politically to pass. And I think ultimately in the medium to long term, talking about this sort of mid-transition and all this sort of stuff, we are going to actually need to orient these utilities' duties away from private short shareholder value and towards the public interest. And that's just a few sources that make that argument. It's a more elaborate argument. Perhaps we can get into it in the Q&A. Probably a topic for another presentation sometime. Thank you.
Hi. Is this on? Hi, I'm Diana Meisenhelter, and I'm with Extinction Rebellion, but I also serve on the NAACP Climate Justice Committee. And I'm going to be talking about a proposed legislative code for the city of Portland that's really interesting. It's called the Climate and Health Standards for Existing Buildings. And there we go. Okay. So as part of the climate emergency plan, the city of Portland committed to a net zero carbon building sector by 2050. In 2019, buildings were the greatest source of carbon emissions in Multnomah County, although transportation of buildings are very close, with each of them being around 40 to 42% of emissions. Then starting in 2019, the Coalition of Communities of Color, Verde, NAACP's Environmental Justice Committee, and other BIPOC groups worked with the city's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability on a community-driven policy for buildings. And this was known as the Build Shift Collective, Building Community, Shifting Power. The effort proposed to establish minimum standards for existing buildings to improve human health, reduce energy cost burdens for tenants, reduce carbon emissions from buildings, prevent displacement through policy design, make buildings more resilient to climate change impacts, and ensure that rental housing had standards related to cooling. So these were called the HEART standards, which was kind of a shortened way of summarizing those goals, and it provided a clear focus. Oops, did I not get it there? Oh, I haven't gotten it. Sorry. Thank you. In 2022, the city engaged a larger set of stakeholders on building decarbonization, including a group that included more building owners, more landlords, more utilities, etc., and a tenant group focused more on the needs of low-income renters. So the Build Shift tenant subgroup prioritized indoor air quality improvement and substantial emissions reductions policies, and they wanted that by 2024. And a maximum indoor air temperature policy by 2027. So in July 2023, Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability proposed a phased approach to implement the Build Shift standards. Phase 1 was supposed to be a multi-family energy reporting and disclosure process. Phase 2 was supposed to be maximum temperature standards for rental housing, and Phase 3 was supposed to be carbon performance standards for commercial and multifamily buildings. And the temperature standards were important because of all of the deaths from the heat dome. First, the deaths in 2021, but then another 5 people died the next year from hyperthermia during heat waves as well. There were 69 in Oregon from the first heat wave. Unfortunately, due to the prior city council and political pressures around elections, this plan didn't move forward in a timely fashion. Many groups have tried keeping it alive, bringing it up at various forums with city staff and the sustainability officer. And Vin Mason, who was here earlier but had to leave, was the BPS staff person who persevered and helped shepherd the created code through legal review just recently, although there are still some unresolved issues around penalties. So it's now housed with Councilor Avalos, which is good, and she hopes to actually hold a public event either end of April or early May, sometime this spring, before it goes to the Housing and Permitting Committee. So there's kind of 2 words of caution I would mention. One is that already the text of the code has a lot of missed deadlines, and so we don't want this to go yet another year. It just keeps getting delayed, as you can see, from 2019 till now. And then the other one is that we don't really know that much about where the new city administrator stands, Administrator Lee. And within this policy, they have the right to adopt, amend, and repeal the rules. So, here are the main components of the current plan. So when it becomes public, I'd really urge you to take the time to read the details, as there are a lot of parts that we don't have time to cover tonight, including the various exemptions and extensions, the right of appeal, the alternative compliance plans, the verification components and inventory components, the fact that it takes 6 to 7 years delay for new construction. But what it does say is that in the first year, owners of covered commercial buildings greater than 20,000 square feet, and then in the second year, building owners of 20,000 square feet who are residential buildings and low-income rentals are exempted, will need to annually report energy performance information, and then there will be a city review of this information before it's made public so that tenants can see critical costs and what they need to know about energy consumption in their buildings. So the city started with this focus because these large buildings are the source of about 2/3 of building emissions in Portland. Utility companies will have to provide owners with an aggregated version of energy data, and in some cases, tenants may need to cooperate on data provision where there are gaps in the data provided. So the next part is the most powerful part of the code, and that's that the city will then calculate an interim carbon performance greenhouse gas standard target and a timeline for reducing emissions 20% every 5 years until net zero is reached by 2050. And there'll be a carbon pollution impact fee per metric ton of CO2 equivalent, and penalties for noncompliance. And that's the fee that's currently being negotiated as the new administrator needs to approve it. Yeah. And then starting the second year, residential owners will need to complete a residential climate and health inventory. And there's a required tenant notification process. And these notifications include information on energy bill discounts, health risk information on the types of stoves and hazards of cooking without proper ventilation, certification of the presence of outdoor ventilation for stove hoods, and types of mechanical cooling and other passive cooling measures. There's also a displacement prevention section that covers necessary construction relocation processes. Now, suffice it to say, what you just heard from Danny and others, this code will likely take huge public pressure with multi-organizational and citizen involvement to get this over the finish line, as we expect that there may be pushback from utilities, landlords, certain businesses and their associations, and multifamily housing groups. So, there are many things we might quibble with in the details of this plan, but probably the biggest concern here is that there is no inclusion of maximum temperature standards, which was a major focus all along for BIPOC, low-income tenants, and community concerns. If this is not addressed in the immediate rendition, there needs to be continued community pressure for policy development in the future. Now, in terms of methane, it's kind of laughable that the standards include tenant notifications on the health risks of various stove types, when we know that the evidence where the preponderance of risk lies. Unfortunately, the city has, and Carra will illuminate this more, why? They've skirted the outright code changes to prevent methane in new construction and the like. Nevertheless, the hope is that this decarbonization phase-out process will result overall in reduced methane and fossil fuels. One problem, though, is that net zero is often problematic because polluters can buy credits with questionable value for actual emission reductions, and there are other loopholes that the public will need to monitor. Despite the odds, if we can get this through and get it passed, it'll be a huge step forward to begin the process of phasing out building emissions. And some have said, and it might be one of the better efforts to date nationally, even though many other cities have been ahead of us, actually, in decarbonization policy development. So I just want to urge you, or we want to urge you, to follow this really closely this spring, and at the right time, help us to put pressure on city council members to do the right thing. This is an important first step. Thanks.
I'm so impressed with all of you. Here you are, still awake, paying attention. Really excellent presentations tonight. And I am afraid Danny has heard this one before, but his was new to me, so that was nice. I am Carra Sahler. I'm the director and one of 4 staff attorneys at an organization called the Green Energy Institute. So we're a climate policy and energy law organization housed within Lewis and Clark Law School's environmental, natural resources and energy law program. So we're grant funded, but we're housed within the law school, which is really fun. I get to work with a lot of young law students. Our mission is to equitably and swiftly and sustainably decarbonize the energy grid. So that means that I'm doing a lot of work at the Public Utility Commission, but some of my favorite work is working with local governments and helping them think about the ways they can legally achieve their climate action plans. I use the term natural gas. That is, frankly, because it's the legal term that's used in statutes, and so that's the term that I'm used to using and that authorities respond to, but that's why that's there. Okay. All right. Here's the first question. We've got 2 questions tonight. What do we want to achieve? And what local power does the city have? Are there any lawyers in the room? Oh, excellent. This is great. I'm a good lawyer though, right? You can accept me? Okay, so a lot of the pictures you'll see are pictures that my daughter took. This one, what do we want to achieve? And this is an audience participation. If we're developing a building policy to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from our buildings, what do we want to achieve with that policy? Say again?
That looks like a fog bank coming.
It looks like a fog bank. Well, yeah, I mean, it is the Oregon coast. Yeah. Any safety for residents?
No natural gas hookups.
No natural gas hookups.
Fighting climate change.
Climate change, okay, good.
Renovation pathway.
Renovation pathway. Okay, so that's kind of getting to something that we'll talk a little bit about, which is differences between how we treat new construction versus existing construction, right? There are different challenges and different legal protocols that work here, which is why the Climate Health Energy Building Performance Standard is so unusual, because it will address existing buildings. Am I holding your microphone? Oh, okay. All right, good. So what local power does the city have? We've got in mind what we want to achieve, right? Now we have to think about what can the local government do. When a local government is thinking about taking action, it has to think about what authority it has, and then it has to think about the barriers. So there are some federal barriers, there are state barriers, and there might even be local barriers. And I'm not talking about political will. I'm talking about legal, right? Legal barriers. I'm not going to address the kinds of things that local governments should absolutely no-brainer do, right? Those are electrify their own buildings. They don't need legal authority to do that. They have that authority. They are the owners of those buildings. We should be pushing the city of Portland to adopt a policy that's similar to Multnomah County's, so that its buildings are decarbonized or on a path to decarbonize. I'm also not going to talk about voluntary incentives. Again, a local government can offer really a whole host of things to encourage people to do what they want them to do. We've seen it doesn't work, right? It's just not effective. So if we want to regulate, we have to think about the authority, and then we have to think about the barriers. Think back to that layer cake, right? The federal, the state, the local. And some of those federal issues are a federal statute called the Energy Policy Conservation Act. That's going to be important because we're going to talk about Berkeley and what happened with Berkeley. The other thing we have to think about is the state's building code, okay? So there's some things that the county, the city can't do because of the state. And then we're going to talk about what's left. And I'm only going to talk about 4 potential pathways, but there are actually more. We're going to start just with a little bit of like a little mini pretend you're in law school, you're a first-year law student. This is what, we got some clapping. Oh, good. You can find me after if you want to go to law school. We have to think about, what does our U.S. Constitution do? Our U.S. Constitution provides power to the federal government and to the state governments, but it doesn't say anything about local governments. So local authority actually comes from the state. And our state constitution allows city voters to confer authority on their government by enacting a home rule charter.
And that acts as the city's constitution. So Portland's charter is our constitution. Most charters in Oregon give cities maximum authority allowable by law, rather than setting out specific powers. Our charter is a bit of a mess though, so you do have to read it carefully. But as a practical matter, most cities are authorized to protect what are called police powers, and that's very broadly defined to be public health, safety, morals, and welfare. They can license and they can tax. So this is capacious authority. The charter typically authorizes the action. The only remaining question is whether a state or federal law takes precedence over that local law. So in other words, the question cities should be asking is, show me where I can't. Right. So preemption's important. And when you're considering viable actions, you have to remember that the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution directs that federal law is positioned over state law. Think that layer cake, right? And because a city is a creature of the state, the federal law displaces the local law. So when a local law conflicts with existing federal law, the federal law preempts or takes precedence over the local law, and same too with the application of state law to local governments. The two questions here I think are helpful, sort of like summarizes what I've just described, right? The first question is whether the local law is authorized by the charter, and then whether the local law is preempted by state or federal law. There are two kinds of preemption. Stick with me here, because this is kind of important when we think about what local governments can do. We have two flavors of preemption in Oregon. We have the first one, which says the state legislature can clearly and unambiguously say that it is the authority on the subject. Okay, so, but it has to be clear in the statute. The other kind of preemption is where you have two laws that conflict. And that means that they can't both operate at the same time. It makes it impossible to comply. Luckily in Oregon, we have pretty good case law, and our courts have said, usually we're not gonna find preemption. We're usually gonna find that the local enactment is fine, it's not preempted, if it can function at the same time as the state law. All right, so now we get to this terrible statute. It wasn't terrible until Berkeley was decided, but it's the Energy Policy and Conservation Act. The piece that's important, and you can see here to my preemption discussion, APCA preempts any state or local regulation concerning the energy efficiency, energy use, or water use of a covered product. Covered products are like HVAC. Think about your HVAC system or your water heater. The idea made sense. We don't want 50 states to have 50 different efficiency standards for the appliances we use, right? If you're a manufacturer of a product, you don't have to comply with 50 different standards. That doesn't make any sense. That's how it was intended to be used. And then the California Restaurant Association had the bright idea that they were going to challenge Berkeley's ban on natural gas using that statute. Unfortunately, the district court agreed with us, saying no, APCA doesn't apply. That made sense. But it was appealed to the Ninth Circuit. That's the court that oversees the federal district courts, including the ones in Oregon and California. Now, I want to start with what was at issue in Berkeley. It was a health and safety code. It prohibited natural gas infrastructure in newly constructed buildings. It defined that natural gas infrastructure as fuel gas piping in or connecting a building to the meter. So it's just that little piece from the meter into the home and through the home. No fossil fuel piping. And it specifically indicated it does not intend to impact energy use or appliances. What did the Ninth Circuit do with that? 2023, 2 Trump-appointed judges. One was sitting by designation from the Court of International Trade, which like never happens. It was a very strange thing. This guy had no business being there. And Judge O'Scanlan, appointed by Reagan, issued the opinion. The court's opinion is quite expansive. And it was concerning enough that Berkeley filed a petition to have it reviewed by a bigger panel called an en banc panel. So more judges were going to hear it. That narrowly got that review, but unfortunately not quite enough judges agreed, but we did get an amended opinion. And that amended opinion said that Berkeley had basically adopted a building code. Even though it had adopted it as a health and safety code, it read it as a building code. And it focused on plain meaning of the words instead of the very technical nature of the statute. And it determined that Berkeley's ordinance effectively required a quantity of 0 natural gas, finding then that the ordinance regulated energy use and ran afoul of EPCA's preemption provision. So it was a very narrow, plain language meaning that really actually didn't make any sense in the context of the very technical nature of the statute. So that's why we can't have a gas ban. The other reason we have to be very careful, most ways that local governments address natural gas is in building codes. That makes sense, right? We're using the natural gas in our buildings. But Oregon has a uniform building code, which means that cities can't adopt anything different than what the state does. Again, the idea is let's make sure that we don't have different building codes in different jurisdictions. That's fine, except for when you have cities that want to go farther faster. So we have to be very careful. So that's again why this ordinance is sort of meandering around the various preemption issues that it faces. There is a local amendment, that is one pathway. No city has done this, but you can basically seek approval from the Building Code Division to adopt something different. We can stop digging the hole, right? This is to, I think, Diana's point about not expanding gas infrastructure in our streets and sidewalks. This is a picture of the distribution system. And so the idea would be no new gas infrastructure in the right-of-way, right, under our cities and streets. So we could stop expansion of the gas system. That's number 2. The EPCA specifically, it does not apply to that kind of pathway. So we could stop expansion of the gas system, the Berkeley decision said. The third one is the kind of ordinance that you're seeing the city of Portland bring forward, which is this building emissions ordinance. New York City has one, and it is a good one in that it is directed at existing buildings, which is the hardest piece to get at, right? Because new buildings, we can keep encouraging our building code division to adopt stricter and stricter standards and eventually get to the place where we don't have new gas. But getting people to replace their gas appliances with electric ones is the harder piece. So this is a good solution to that. And this is our climate and health standards for existing buildings. And then finally, a pollution fee. So this is what Ashland has done. The Berkeley case says specifically in a concurring opinion, says that no problem if you're gonna apply a carbon tax. So basically the idea is impose a fee on developers who install gas appliances. And that, again, is what Ashland has done. And so I say use all the power, right? Let's prohibit fossil fuel piping in the right-of-way. Let's stop digging the hole. Let's impose a building performance standard, which is what Portland has for existing buildings. And let's also make people pay a pollution fee if they install gas. And that's it. I'm sorry I went a little over.
Okay, so I presume that people have filled out your cards and you have questions, hold them up. Hold up your card. And then if somebody could run back and grab the questions. And we have one right here. Okay. First question. Yes, this one I care about. How is rapid data center build out bringing rapid demand for natural gas, methane? So who wants to talk about data centers and methane? Both of which suck a lot.
Jennifer.
Wait a minute. Who on our panel?
There you go.
Pass it on down.
No question that data centers are a huge growth of load on our system. And that in order to serve that new load, we're needing to operate our power generation and running more natural gas. Now, the issue is, what do we do about it? And so I'll say, if folks have heard about the Power Act from last legislative session, we're implementing that now at the Public Utility Commission. We're waiting for an order at the end of April. One of the very interesting solutions that a number of parties, including GEI, is arguing for is for those data centers to get in line. That they cannot be served until there's clean generation available to serve them. So that's one solution to that.
Yeah, I'll say Bridge Collective has had the privilege, I'd say, of working with a community in southwest Memphis over the years. We helped them defeat a crude oil pipeline in their community in sort of 2020, 2021. But they're kind of the quintessential case of data center build out, encouraging methane gas use. Elon Musk's XAI facility out there brought in a bunch of mobile gas turbines in violation of the Clean Air Act and various other environmental laws, and started operating them in that community with very immediately noticeable health effects. I would also say, kind of on a regional system level, and this is related to Northwest Natural sort of narrative around grid reliability, is we're starting to see them tout natural gas as sort of a solution to the grid reliability issues that are being forecasted as a result of the massive increase in energy demand. And down in Eugene, EWEB, which is a public utility, you know, I love publicly owned utilities, I'm an advocate for them, but you know, at the end of the day, it's a bit like unions. You know, unions are only as good as you make them. Your public utility is only as good as the people you elect and appoint to run them. And EWEB is currently trying to run a pilot project with a gas turbine down there as a sort of winter peak energy demand response measure, drastically increasing the air pollution in Eugene, in the Willamette Valley, at a time of year when, you know, there's an inversion and the air quality issues are already pretty significant. So I'll just leave it at that.
I don't want to be too long, but I do want to say that should not stop you from putting in a heat pump. A heat pump is so efficient that the national labs has demonstrated it is cleaner even on a coal grid, right? So it's not a reason not to stop electrification.
Personally, I think that all the billionaire tech bros and whoever should be forced to live next to a data center. Or in one. Excellent. Could somebody grab the question from over there? So another question, is there a group working on the dangers with regards to Northwest Natural's blue tank of liquid natural gas? What regulations can be passed at what governmental level?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, the tank farms, sometimes known as the CEI hub, is where Northwest Natural has a big blue tank that they use for liquefied natural gas. So if you get that gas really cold, it turns into a liquid and you can put it in a tank. It is covered under state law, which is going to require seismic stabilization, like the oil tanks are covered. And I think Northwest Natural is probably biding their time a little bit to see what happens. They have a piece, and maybe Carra knows something about this, they have the cold box. It's what makes the gas cold. And that cold box, at least the last I saw it, the pictures show that it's kind of held together with duct tape. It's kind of old. And so they, I believe, got permission from the PUC to replace the cold box, you know, from all of the rates that people pay into the gas utility. But I don't think they've done it yet. I think
only if DEQ said it was okay. They were waiting for the seismic study to happen.
Waiting for the seismic study. So I think that's what we're waiting for, is the seismic study to see whether or not that is going to happen. I've been told by the people at Northwest Natural that that tank is really only used for certain peak times in the winter. And, you know, I don't know, but I wonder if, like, this winter, which was pretty mild, did they even have to use it? Did they?
Good question, I don't know.
You don't know, yeah. But I think there is some reason to think, as more and more of the area that that tank serves, which is mostly north, northwest, and a little bit in northeast Portland, as more of that area electrifies, maybe that storage area, which is, as you know, is on the unstable ground and all these risks, maybe that tank won't have to exist anymore.
That sounds good. Is there any evidence that a private shareholder company that provides both gas and electric services, Pacific Gas and Electric, for instance, in California, is more inclined to support or engage in a transition to electrification away from gas than like Northwest Methane?
I'd say probably the regional example would be Puget Sound Energy, and they seem to be much less adversarial towards electrification compared to Northwest Natural. A little bit of historical trivia. Some of you, I obviously wasn't around then, but some of you may remember circa 2000, 2001, 2, 3, where PGE was owned, Portland General Electric was owned by Enron, and Enron collapsed and PGE almost went bankrupt. There was actually a proposal at the time for Northwest Natural had a bid to acquire PGE, and it's kind of interesting to think of what kind of alternative history we'd be in right now if we had a single gas electric utility as well as Pacific Power serving Portland.
And I'll just add, we have 3 gas-only utilities in Oregon, but Avista, which serves South Oregon, is a gas and electric in Washington. And so what's interesting about that is it has a different mentality. So for example, in a rate case recently, GEI and the Citizens Utility Board got Avista to agree to a targeted voluntary electrification pilot. So instead of replacing very expensive leaky pipes, it will help people who wish to electrify do that.
And I'll say just briefly, one of the issues with Northwest Natural and things like thermal energy networks and electrification pilots is they're constantly talking about how they have one of the most modern, tightest, newest pipeline systems in the country. So unfortunately, they've already rate-based a lot of their pipe upgrades and probably won't need to be making some of those expensive changes for a while.
Okay, yeah, this one. Discuss the connections between methane and the U.S. military-industrial complex. Any takers?
They're there.
Diana's putting her hand out.
I'm going to let Diana take this one. It's all connected, but I do tend to focus on municipal policy pretty manically. So.
Well, I'm not going to say very much, except to say we know that the largest institutional cause of climate change is the military. And these wars that are happening right now are terrifying in terms of what they're doing and in terms of the destruction to the environment and the blowing up of everything, including natural gas and oil things that are then spilling. And I mean, it's just unthinkable, and especially how ill-planned, and I mean, the whole thing is just so outrageous. So in terms of, I mean, obviously methane's 80 times in the short run more potent than carbon dioxide. And, you know, I mean, all of this is working against us, and it's making that climate crisis that we have even worse, and it's kind of unthinkable what is gonna happen next. So, I don't know if there's really much more we have to say other than that. I mean,
I did have one quick thing to add that Diane made me think of, which is I showed some slides from an influence map study that showed different narratives of the gas industry globally. They also did a really great report on the gas industry's response to the war in Ukraine a few years ago, and how they sort of leveraged that and seized on that quite opportunistically to push for massive LNG exports to Europe. And I think we need to be on the lookout for very similar opportunism this time around.
well, it's already started. So, I mean, we're in war with Iran, and we're giving them all of this money to let them
Buy the oil.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
No sense.
It's all crazy.
it's insane.
I think this just demonstrates how much we all need to work together, all our different organizations, on all this stuff. Safety question, is there any risk of methane in the process of extracting the water from the natural gas in fuel-efficient gas furnaces? How dangerous is the natural gas line under Highway 30 adjacent to the leaky legacy pipe at the hub? Anybody?
If it's leaky, let's find out and,
Yeah, that would be
and
good.
give it a reason.
We could do something about it if we knew it was leaky.
Leaky seems bad. I think it's a good question. I'm sorry that we'll save that one for
Whoever
homework.
wrote that, come and talk to us
Yeah.
afterwards so we
Yeah.
can get more info.
Yeah, that's agreed. If cities can ask, show me where I can't, why don't they ask it more often?
Right.
Pass it down.
Yeah, that's a really good question. They're really afraid of being sued. Right? So even if they have the authority to do something, they're gonna get sued. And I keep telling them that, and just saying it's not a reason not to act, right? And also, it'd be really fun if climate advocates could threaten to sue if they don't act. That might right.
No one has sued Ashland.
And no one has sued Ashland yet. Ashland was afraid that it was gonna be sued, but it hasn't been yet. And that policy was adopted last year and put in place this year. I did have an anecdote that a lawyer came up to me at a conference and said that he'd gotten a call from someone asking if this policy was legal. He was really mad about having to pay for the gas appliances he was gonna be putting in his new residential home. And the lawyer was like, I can't find anything wrong with it.
Thanks, these are great questions. I've been looking at a lot of new townhouses and none have gas. Why? Was that a you or just a
yay.
yes?
Yay.
I think that's a good, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, Vin was here earlier. I was talking to him. It seems like a lot of the multifamily construction is being built all electric in Portland for various reasons. I think some of them is just, it pencils out well for them. I will say I'm a renter. Some of the new multifamily apartments I've visited still are being built with gas. Some are being built with electric, but with resistance heating rather than heat pumps. And when I say resistance heating rather than heat pumps, I mean heat pumps use a sort of refrigeration technology to, heat at sort of 200-300% efficiency, whereas things like cadet heaters and baseboard heating and stuff like that maximum efficiencies there are less than 100%. So you're not using the electric as efficiently, and you don't get the same greenhouse gas reductions from it versus gas. What was the point I was going to make? Things like the Portland Clean Energy Fund are also really helping, particularly in regulated affordable housing, to make the difference between building efficient all electric versus inefficiently.
I just want to piggyback on what Danny said, which is, don't let any of your neighbors think that they can't put in a heat pump because it's going to overload the grid. Okay? Heat pumps are extremely efficient, and if you are switching from electric baseboard, you are doing a good thing for the grid. So we could put in heat pumps in lots and lots of homes without a grid problem.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more questions. I talked to a bunch of contractors at a weird event I was at, and a lot of them said, oh yeah, we don't like putting in gas anymore because we know it's going to get more expensive as time goes by. If you're buying a new house, why would you do that? I thought that was interesting. What, if any, local, state levers, policies, regulations, etc., can interfere with current industrial manufacturing that relies on methane feedstock and fuel? Thank you. How is this different than new industry?
One of the last gifts of the Wheeler administration to the Portland Metro Chamber and Industry was this large PSEF Clean Industry initiative. I'm on the Community Benefits Co-Design Group Advisory Group board for that. That's going to be a program administered through Prosper Portland that is going to focus on existing industrial process heat and other industrial processes and trying to find ways to reduce emissions there. So that's going to be a grant program. There's going to be sort of, plug and play grants. I think about $100,000, and then a smaller number of, larger grants. So that's one thing. There's also, which I think Carra knows much more about, so I might pass to you, the state industrial decarb work.
Yeah, I mean, implied in the question is a question about biomethane, it sounds like. And that, the tricky thing about biomethane is that what they're doing is, trapping it, cleaning it from mostly factory farms, but also landfills and wastewater, and then putting it in the pipe. And so it's not going just to industry, right? It's going into the pipe to all of us. And that's fine, it's indistinguishable from methane, so it's not like it causes any more danger to you. But we do want that very expensive and rare resource, when using it, to go to the hard to decarbonize industries. So we do need to think about how we're using this very, again, expensive and rare resource. There is, the state will be undertaking a rulemaking for those what are called energy intensive trade exposed industries. So these are the industries that have to compete internationally and really can't electrify easily, right? So what other solutions might exist for them? And so there'll be a rulemaking to explore that.
Okay, what kind of data would be most helpful for increasing defossilization trajectories?
This is actually a really interesting or pet topic of mine, which is, and this relates to what Melanie was talking about with these thermal energy networks or networked ground source heat pumps. I've talked to local government people about how we would sort of figure out where to install these in the Portland metro area or in Multnomah County, and where you want to do it is on a sort of geographic level would be neighborhoods where there isn't a high level of electrification already. So there's already, most homes, or at least a high proportion of homes in a sort of concentrated area are using gas. And then also you'd want to do it sort of on an infrastructure level where those gas pipes are aging more than others. You need data for this, and who has the data? The investor-owned utilities. Do the investor-owned utilities want to give the data to governments or to each other? No, because they consider it commercially sensitive information. If they were publicly owned utilities, like they are in Northern Europe, they would be able to do things like they have in Denmark and Germany and the Netherlands, called municipal heat plans, where they actually do look at things on a geographic level and say, okay, these homes have electricity, these homes have gas, this is how we're going to sort of plan the transition on a spatial level. eWeb in Eugene, which is a publicly owned utility, can kind of do this because they can sort of figure out from people's bills which homes have gas as a primary heating source and which don't, because they can sort of tell from the electricity use. So yeah, that data would be really helpful, but one of the obstacles for at the moment is the investor-owned nature of Portland's utilities.
You have a theme.
Although some data will be collected if this new bill goes through.
Yes, part of the reason for the bill. Okay, this is the last question. And I think I'm going to be answering this. Will there be a recording that includes the slides? The comment is so much valuable information, hard to listen and read. So there will definitely be a recording, and I think we can provide the slides. Is that true?
I can answer that.
All right. Here's a better person to answer. One who's getting
who's-
tangled in the clay.
Actually take this to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't need it to be seen. Yeah, we're gonna, Lennon, who's my sorcerer's apprentice, actually. And he and I, well, he's actually gonna do the editing, because I'm going out of town. So I'm not sure how soon, Lennon, you think you have it edited?
Within a week.
Okay, I'd say within about 2 weeks it'll be up, and it'll be, actually, right, I don't think we have an actual official Rumble website yet, but if you go to the Media Project Online /Rumble on the River, it'll be the top of the page, a link to the YouTube video.
And we will send out a link.
Right.
The Rumble team, if we have your email, then we will send the link out when it's ready. And we do have a couple of announcements. First of all, Tuesday, March 31st, 11 a.m., Augustana Lutheran Church, the CEI Hub Press Conference. This is a mandatory appearance for everybody. Show up. A lot of work being done on that. And then also our next Rumble on the River. Do we have a slide for that? I'm not sure if we do.
Yes.
There we go. What's the deal with data centers? Part 2. This is what are we going to do about them and stuff. April 28th, First Unitarian Church. Show up. It's going to be fun. We'll have snacks, which is really important. And a couple other things are real quick. Barbara Bernstein's Once a Braided River is going to be showing at the Tomorrow Theater Sunday, April 26th at 7 p.m. This is an amazing film. There's information about it at the Columbia Riverkeeper table.
No.
Oh no, I'm sorry, at the front. At the front, yeah. Let's see. Tells the story of how the North Reach and Willamette River was transformed from a braided river, rich in biodiversity, to the sacrifice zone hellscape that it is now. But it's good. We should watch it.
It has a happy ending.
It has a happy ending. I'm very excited about that. Okay. Let's see. And one last brief announcement. Earth Justice film series will be showing its next film, The Politics of Beauty, the story of Interior Secretary Stuart Udall, this Sunday, March 29th at Havara Shalom on, did I get that right?
Yeah.
Northwest 18th. Entry is free, and so is the popcorn. Flyers at the PSR table, so free popcorn. Can't go wrong. Yes, I think that's the last of the announcements, except there's still, I think, probably cookies. And while you're eating cookies, help. We need a lot of help with chairs and tables. There's a weird moving around of tables and chairs that's more than the normal. So we could use some help with that. And thanks to our panelists.